1945 overhang between the greatest generation and the baby boomers. Born too late to fight in the war and too soon to be counted as post-war, we are changelings with feet in both camps. I began my marriage and my career as a journalist in 1962, a straight-arrow product of the 50s. I often thought of myself as a generational straddle, one foot in the psychedelic waters of the 60s and the other still firmly rooted to the familiar terrain of the 50s. In talking to others from that time, I discovered I was not alone in that split experience. Everyone who went through the 60s sees it through his or her own distinct prism. Our 60s graduates come in all ages, all sizes, from all parts of the country, and with an assortment of certainties, doubts, lifestyles, and memories of a time when the compass that had guided us for so long began to spin wildly. You'll meet some famous names from the 60s, but also those who went through life-changing experiences entirely comfortable in their anonymity. For the most part, I'm like the old class president at this reunion. I call on them and then let them have their say. I am here as a journalist, but also as a citizen, a grandfather now, and a young man then. Not everyone you might like to hear from is in this reunion, but I am confident that the people I met along the way then, and those who intrigue me from afar, have something to say about then and now worth hearing. Part 1. Something's happening here. A loss of innocence. In 1968, America was deeply divided by a war in Southeast Asia, and it was preparing to vote in a presidential election in which the choices were starkly different. The country was in the midst of a cultural upheaval unlike anything experienced since the Roaring '20s. Everyone wondered whether America could regain its balance. 40 years later, another war, this one in the Middle East, was deeply dividing the USA. Republican and Democratic candidates for president were laying out starkly different scenarios for the country's future. The place of America in the world was hotly debated. The popular culture was again an issue. The eve of 2008 was not exactly the 60s all over again, but we still have a lot to learn from that memorable, stimulating, dangerous, and maddening time in American life 40 years ago. The 60s also gave rise to more minority representation in politics, African American, Hispanic, and Asian. By the end of the 60s, women were newly empowered in almost every conceivable facet of society. Music, television, films, and language took on new forms, defying convention and what used to be called polite language and behavior. I arrived in Los Angeles to join NBC News in 1966, and by then, Charles Dickens' opening lines in A Tale of Two Cities had never seemed so prophetic. Were these the best or the worst of times? I wish I could say I felt the tremors of seismic change beginning and spreading out across the political and cultural landscape, but I was mostly trying to find my way. I was a 26-year-old pilgrim from the prairie heartland and the sensibilities of a 50s working-class family. I was the father of a toddler with another child on the way. I fit the prototype of the typical young white male of the time. I had been a crew-cut apostle of the Boy Scouts, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, attending Sunday school and church, drinking too much beer in college, but never smoking dope. Marijuana in the 50s and early 60s was the stuff of jazz musicians and hoodlums in faraway places. Before I married the love of my life, my high school classmate Meredith, we had never spent a night together. In those days, parked cars and curfews were the defining limits of courtship. We were married in 1962 when Meredith was 21 and I was 22 in a traditional Episcopal church wedding with a reception at our hometown country club. We left the next day with all of our worldly possessions, including the 5-table cigarette lighters we had received as wedding presents, in the back seat of the no-frills Chevrolet compact car her father had given us as a wedding present. We were eager to see a wider world, but only one step at a time. California was still 4 years away. Our first stop was Omaha, Nebraska, which, unlike today, was an unimaginative and conservative mid-sized city a half-day's drive down the Missouri River from our hometown. We could barely afford $90 a month to rent a furnished apartment, but when we went looking in the stifling heat of a Great Plains August, I was dressed in a jacket and tie, and Meredith was wearing part of her honeymoon trousseau, including a girdle.